What if you could go back in time and walk the path of one of the world's most popular sporting activities through the eyes of someone who spent an entire lifetime in the proverbial eye of that sports needle? Today, we'll be taking that journey through time with Amby Burfoot, the man whose name is synonymous with the world of running. So much so that a few years after winning the Boston Marathon as a 21-year-old college student, he ended up becoming the editor-in-chief of running's premier magazine, Runner's World, a role he held from 1985 through 2012. Welcome to the Catalyst 360 podcast, your source for engaging, evidence-based insights on health, wellness, and high performance. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching 360, and yes, as a lifelong runner, I had this discussion start on my schedule. But if running sounds like punishment to you, or you could kind of care less, don't worry. Today's discussion will be as much about life as it is about the intricacies of the sport. This was a fun one. Speaking of fun, the event of the year for health and wellness coaches, the Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium, is coming up September 22nd through the 24th in gorgeous and affordable Estes Park, Colorado. This MBHWC-approved program not only offers an outstanding lineup of educational opportunities, but it also provides a setting and an open enough schedule to allow you time to reflect, relax, and recharge your coaching battery. Housing does fill up early, so don't wait too long to get registered. All the details available on our Training Institute site, which is catalystcoachinginstitute.com under the Retreat tab. For the employers, EAPs, and wellness service providers in our audience who maybe are looking for a way to integrate the very best in coaching into your program or your platform, Catalyst Coaching 360 might just be the answer you've been seeking. Please reach out to us. Results at catalystcoaching360.com. That's results at catalystcoaching360.com. Or call me personally. My number is 303-521-1570, and we'll set up some time to discuss options. Now, it's time to run down the path of sport and life with the one and only Amby Burfoot on the latest episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast. Amby, thanks for joining us. Man, what a privilege. You have had such an impact on the world of running for more than a couple of years, my friend.
Thank you for saying that. I'm pleased to be here and talk about running and performance.
Sounds great. So you were most competitive in the 60s and 70s, kind of right when distance running, aerobic exercise in general began to really take off in popularity. Take us back to those years. What was happening? What was going on in the world, in the culture that maybe led to running and aerobic exercise taking this leap when it did?
Well, it's interesting when you throw us back to the 60s, which was indeed, those were my best years. When I'm introduced to people these days as a Boston Marathon winner, they always say, "Oh, when did you win?" And I always respond, "Before you were born."
Exactly.
Because that's usually the case. You know, my personal story is completely a mentor story, and I don't know how much you're aware of that. But my high school coach was John J. Kelly. Just randomly, I was a baseball player and a basketball player because my father was a YMCA director type. So I did all the usual sports. But eventually, when I got to the point of wanting to play them in high school, I hit the hard realization that to play those sports, you had to be muscular, powerful, fast, jumping, and all of those things that I was not. So I tried out for cross country, and the coach of our cross country team in Groton, Connecticut at Fitch High was John J. Kelly.
And I know who he is, but give the listeners a little, because he was a world changer as well.
Well, you don't want to prompt me too much on Kelly, but I will. John was the 1957 Boston Marathon winner. He was essentially the first person to run a sub-220 marathon in the U.S., the first American.
And just a quick pause. Everyone, if you're thinking, well, wait a minute, didn't Kipchoge break 2 hours on a non-legal course and knock on the door? What's the big deal? Folks, there weren't the aid stations. There wasn't the technology. There wasn't the fuel. It was a different world back then. So sorry, keep going. I just want to set the stage there.
Of course, and you're absolutely correct. John was a two-time U.S. Olympian in the marathon. He ran in 56 and 60. But what I always try to explain to people is that while he was a tremendous running motivator, influencer, mentor in my life, He did not attempt to be that. He was completely anti-guru. He was not trying to push anybody into any lifestyle that was not right for them. He was encouraging of everyone in the sort of alternative lifestyles back then. So his group of friends included runners, artists, folk singers, playwrights, thespians, early environmentalists. He had an organic garden in the mid 1950s. Wow. And I can't tell you how many people did not know anything about organic gardening in the mid 50s, but he did. He rode his bicycle to work at the high school rather than to drive the polluting vehicle that was in his driveway, but he used it as little as possible. He was so forward thinking that it was almost it was a difficult life for him because no one else around him thought in those ways. Right. And he had 3 young daughters and was, very mediocre public school pay. And people were always telling him, Kelly, why are you wasting all your time running? Go get another job, support your family better. There was absolutely no understanding of someone running for the pure joy and challenge of it. And also, while he won Boston once, he finished second something like 7 times or 5 times, whatever it was. And in the U.S. in the gung-ho 50s, and perhaps now still, second place is losing. So the people in the community were like, Kelly, why can't you beat the Finns? Why do you let the Japanese? What's wrong with you? You're an American. You should be number 1. Wow. So there was just absolutely no support. And it was a hard go to go it alone. But he went it alone because that was who he was.
So you got mentored by him. It seems like I remember a somewhat humorous story that probably happened to a lot of us where you were playing basketball or baseball or football or something, and they sent you out to do your laps, and you discovered, wow, like I'm up here and I'm not really tired, and everyone else is back there panting. Am I remembering that or some semblance of that correctly?
You have a deep and accurate memory, Brad. I was the last pick. I was the last player on the junior varsity basketball team. I mean, we maybe had 15 on the squad, and I was 15. So the coach put me in once when we were behind by 63 points with 12 seconds left, whatever, nothing to lose. And one day we were having a bad practice, and he was so pissed off at us that he sent us out to run the cross-country course, which none of us had done, none of us wanted to do. I was the worst player on the team, but running this 3-mile course, I happened to be the first one to come back. And I was like, after that, it was like, well, do I want to continue to be the worst basketball player in town? Or what would happen if I would try out for cross country and see what running with those skinny kids was like? So that's where I was the next year. And that was the beginning of meeting John Kelly, being coached by him, and the long, wonderful road to my running career.
So coming back to the culture or the physiology developments or something. It's just interesting that the early 70s, and there's some things about the U.S. won the Olympic marathon, and, the aerobics book came out from Cooper and all these other things. But were there other things that maybe folks aren't aware of that helped spark that elevation of not just running, but endurance type activities as a whole?
We can only speculate about those things, of course, and I will. I'll make a distinction between the 60s and the 70s. In the 60s, all of us who were running were basically kids who had run in high school or college and figured, why don't I keep it going for a few years, run the Boston Marathon because that's what people in New England do, and then, I'll probably quit when I'm 25. But of course, the 60s were a time of great social unrest and change and things going on. And in the 70s, we suddenly, it seemed to me, had things like Earth Day. We had a big natural foods movement burgeoning in the early 70s. In 68, when I won Boston, there were, I think, 980 runners at Boston, which was a huge increase over the 50s. But in the 70s, it really took off to the point, of course, that the race instituted its famous qualifying standards because the organizers didn't feel they could handle 1,500 runners. I mean, imagine.
Wow. And now that's one wave.
That's very small part of one wave. And, how do we deal with that? And Boston did not deal well with it. And there were a number of years when the finish at Boston was a kind of a disaster where we were all lined up for a block waiting for our popsicle stick or whatever they handled us. But things did happen in the 70s. And of course, Frank winning the Munich Olympics, Frank Shorter winning the 72 Munich Olympic Marathon easily, seemingly without effort if you watched it from home on TV, was a galvanizing force. And a few years later, Bill Rogers pops onto the scene and he starts winning multiple races, marathons at Boston and New York. And that's a huge impetus. And Jim Fix, and then another Connecticut boy, I'll add, along with Kelly, Bill Rogers, myself, Frank Shorter went to college at Yale.
Is that right?
So Connecticut can claim him too. Jim Fix writes the complete book of running. And then we are off to the races.
And you've got Prefontaine over on the other coast, burning it up in the shorter distance.
You had to bring up that other coast, didn't you?
All right. So you provide an incredible perspective on the sport of running as a competitor, a writer, then the editor for, I can't remember, was it 30 years, 27 years, something like that? I'd love to get your take on some of your favorites over the years. So I've got 4 different categories, and I'll let you run with this as you'd like. Your all-time favorite runner, or if you want to pick 2, that's fine too. But if you had to say, that was the runner that I just...
Well, you're asking hard questions.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to make too many enemies, but I'll go with what pops to mind first on these questions. And I saw her this weekend, Joan Benoit Samuelson.
I thought you might say her.
Was a revelation. I was in the Olympic Stadium when she came in 1984, and all of us hardened journalists who aren't supposed to have an emotion in our bodies were standing up, crying and cheering for her as she came into the stadium there. I'll add that it was about, it was 4 years before that, I went to a local road race in Maine, a 10K on the coast somewhere. And I don't remember much about the race, but the next day we all got together for, you got to do another 10 miles the morning after the race. So we're running along this 10 mile and everybody's training run, but everybody's pretty fit and we're moving along at what I considered a hard but not exhaustive pace. And I looked over at one point and there was this little waif of a girl running next to me, about 5 feet 6 inches tall. And so, you tune in to whoever's next to you. And at some point I realized that she wasn't even breathing. I mean, she was running easier than I was. And that was astonishing to me at that point. And of course, that was Joan Benoit at 18 or 19, whatever her age was then. So she was phenomenal then. She was phenomenal in 84, and she's kept, she's kept a very true authoritative path, which I think is important. It's something I've always tried to do in my life. She's Joan Benoit Samuelson on the global stage, but she's Joni back home in Maine with her family, friends, working the local environment and other things that are important to her.
And give us some context of that first Olympic marathon that she won. I think people don't realize the ridiculousness of some of the scientific, we call it pseudoscience, saying, well, women can't do that. Like, what are we doing here? And then all of a sudden, the women just start crushing it and cutting the times down by immense numbers. Can you kind of set the tone there?
Well, that's one that, again, where I could go on at too great a length because, of course, I wrote a book called The First Ladies of Running, which covers everyone from Roberta Gibb in 1966, the first Boston Marathon runner, up through Joni. And then I threw in Oprah because I, by chance, just happened to run Oprah's marathon with her at Marine Corps. And that was quite a striking and an impactful experience for me.
Well, and I think for the population as a whole, because she brought it to reality. It was Oprah. She can, if she can do it, well, maybe I could do it.
Brad, that was the cover line we put on Runner's World when we had the photo of Oprah afterwards. And I was scared to death to run that cover because when was it? 1990, I'm forgetting, 5 or 6. There were essentially 0% Black runners subscribing to Runner's World and less than 0% Black, formerly overweight women runners.
Right.
And so I thought, like, this magazine is going to be the biggest bomb in the history of Runner's World. I'll probably get fired from my job for having the audacity of putting Oprah on the cover, and all of our readers will hate it. Of course, it ended up being the best-selling cover in the history of Runner's World. And it was half Oprah, but it was also the exact lines that you just expressed. Oprah did it, so can you. And people picked up on that, and you heard it repeated a lot, and it settled into people's memories. And we were just talking about Joan Benoit Samuelson, 1984. In terms of a women's running boom, it was kind of crickets after 1984. Not a lot happened as great as Joni was. But after Oprah ran the marathon in the mid-90s, that's when women's running began to take off. Was it an Oprah effect? I can't know that. Nobody can prove that. Sure. But there was an Oprah correlation for sure, because the mid-90s and late 90s are the beginning of the tremendous women's running boom.
Wow. All right. How about your favorite race personally? You've run, I'm not going to say trillions, but it's probably not much less than that. What is your one?
I have to go with the Manchester Road Race on Thanksgiving Day here outside of Hartford, because that's a race that I've run 60 years in a row, which I'm not sure it's a record, but I'm beginning to think it's a record for longevity in one annual road race. I was smart enough not to pick Boston and try to go back and run a marathon every year, but I have gone back to run Manchester every year since 1963. So I think this will be 61 this year. And I can tell you, when you run a race every year, no matter, even if it's only 5 miles, which sounds like a lark, there are going to be years when you've got an Achilles tendonitis, which is you can barely walk. There are going to be years when you've just gotten married and other stuff is going on in life. One year I had walking pneumonia after just catching a pneumonia. And the worst by far, which I don't think we'll go into in great detail, but one year I had a very debilitating microbiome disease in Thanksgiving time. It resulted from running on the trail, falling and having a lot of bleeding wounds, ankles, knees, hips, elbows, going to the doctor, and they loaded me up on antibiotics, and the antibiotics wiped out my microbiome, and I got really sick, and I lost 15 pounds, which I did not have to spare, and my mental health suffered tremendously, and I wasn't even sure I could get to the starting line that day, but my family kind of grabbed me and walked me up there, and then biology or habit kicked in, and I made it slowly that year. But you come across a lot of stuff, and you just persist or try to as best you can. And after 60 years, it becomes something of an event and something I'm very proud of. I always say to people, a little facetiously, that it's easy to win the Boston Marathon. You can just be lucky and have a good day. But it is in no way easy to run the same annual road race 60 years in a row, because you'll have lots of bad days and you still have to do it.
And the race has to stay active. You picked the right one, my friend.
Well, Thanksgiving is the biggest running day in America. There are races everywhere, which is wonderful. This one is the second or third oldest road race in New England. So they've got a good crowd, and it's not going anywhere soon. It's a very, very popular race. Half the people dress in turkey suits or hula skirts or, that sort of thing. And then there's us old, mean, lean guys who just strip down and go for it every year. And so it's a really great race.
What about a personal running related memory in your life? Maybe it's not even a run, maybe it's not even a race, but something, you talked about Joni, something that you're just like, I'll just never forget?
Okay, what comes to mind for that one is the Athens, Greece Marathon of 2010, which was the 2500th anniversary of Phidippides run from the plains of Athens to Greece. And of course, I always knew I wanted to run Athens someday, and this was the year to do it. Unfortunately, I had my one minor surgery, knee surgery early in the year, so I wasn't in much shape, and I didn't do a lot of training. But my wife and my son is not a runner. He's a gym rat. He's as big and strong as I am skinny and weak. They secretly trained for it and went to the race with me. And so then we developed the plan that the three of us would run together the whole way, and it would be a whole family, Burfoot family thing, the old weakened father with the knee surgery and the younger wife and son going the distance. And we set out with great intent at a very slow, manageable pace. And my wife had the worst day of her life and had stomach distress and diarrhea and dropped back really early. And I figured she dropped out. My son lasted 20 miles and then he hit the wall hard. And we walked every mile of the last 6 to get right outside the stadium. The whole way I'm looking back for my wife thinking maybe she'll catch us because we're walking. Maybe she's out there. But I had given up hope because it was so late and slow. And I knew how sick she was. Quarter mile outside the stadium, I look back and here comes my wife running like a storm down the road to catch us. And I go up the road towards her with my arms outstretched, kiss, kiss, hug, hug, and all of that. And she goes steaming by me without even practically giving me a look. And I'm like, oh, crap, I think I'm divorced. And so I say to my son, come on, let's go. We got to catch her. And he can't move a muscle. So we just keep walking. We get to the finish line finally after my wife, and we go over to her and say, what happened? Why didn't you stop and run in and finish with us? That was the whole plan, the three of us finishing together. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you didn't stop. You could have stopped and we could have come in and finished together. It would have been great, just like we planned. And she said, what do you mean? And then we figured out that she figured we had finished 2 hours earlier and we were walking up the road to just greet her as she comes in. So she totally thought we were done and fed and warmed down and everything. And she just wanted to get it done. Total instant miscommunication. But we all made it and we all had a great trip together. And it was a historic Athens marathon. And I'll remember that one forever.
Love it. Love it. All right. Last of your faves, greatest running story you've covered as a writer or editor.
Of course, we come back to Joni and the Olympic marathon win. Of course, that was spectacular. But for this one, I'm going to go to another favorite race of mine, perhaps my second favorite, I should say, which I ran and wrote about. And that's the Comrades Marathon in South Africa, which is, of course, an ultra marathon. It's 53 or 54 miles. The distance changes a little bit each year. In South Africa, nobody stops at 26. They just keep on going. So instead of it being an ultra marathon with 59 runners, it's got 25,000 runners running the ultra. It's got so many traditions that we've never heard about in this country. For example, the race changes direction every year. 1 year is an up run and 1 year is a down run. So imagine running Boston from downtown to Hopkinton. If you want to find a killer marathon course, that would be it. Nobody cares about their finish time. The first year I got there, I said to everyone, oh, what's your PR at Comrades? Nobody knew. It just wasn't important to them. The only thing that was important was how many times they had finished the race. Because after you finished it 10 times, you get a color-coded number. It's green or something, and that you stand out as that. And when you finish it 25 times, you get a silver-colored number, and so on and so forth. So everybody just runs Comrades to go back to log a number another year and to work towards a color-coded number. And when you think about it, that's a great reason for running. because, PRs come way too far between. And once you hit one, sometimes it's hard to hit another one. But the idea, to me at least, of going back and doing something momentous year after year after year is a really wonderful, powerful, motivating force.
It's interesting you mentioned that Bart Yasso joined us years ago, the mayor of running, and he picked that race as his all-time favorite. So you two are on similar paths there. So let's go back to Boston 2014. You were coming off some struggles we're not going to get into, but you made it to the start line. I was injured, but there was no way I was missing that year. That was the year. The emotions coming down Boylston Street, slowest marathon of my life, but the most. Amby, I can still remember like the emotional pull as we were going down Boylston, and the crowd was just crazy. Can you give the listeners kind of a sense of what that day was like, why 14 was so important to the running community, and why, I don't know, just tell us a little bit about that year.
Well, you're absolutely correct. I totally agree with you. For many years after the 100th Boston, which was 1996, I told everyone I met that the 1996 100th Boston Marathon was the greatest marathon the world will ever see. How could it possibly be surpassed? And then came 2014. And since then, I've just said to everyone, those of us who were privileged to run the 2014 Boston Marathon do feel privileged. We do realize how fortunate we were, because a lot of people wanted to get in and couldn't that year. And it will, I think, forever be the greatest, most emotional marathon.
Zero question.
Because how can you beat it? Of course, we have to flash back to 2013. I was one of the 5,000 runners in 2013 who was stopped a mile short of the finish line. And we heard nothing, saw nothing, and received no information. Yet we were stopped in the road. And, when you're a mile from the finish line, you finally know you're going to make it. So we were not exactly happy campers when they told us we couldn't keep going. We didn't know. We were pissed off.
Sure.
And then, we were told to disperse and walk to our hotels, which I did. And while walking to the hotels, I crossed intersections where ambulance after ambulance and police car after police car and siren after siren. And you start to realize something really bad has happened. It was not truly until I got into the hotel and looked up at a TV screen in the hotel lobby, which everyone was looking up at in stunned, complete silence, just watching the replays, the endless replays of the horrific events on the sidewalks of Boston, that I realized what has happened. So, immediately after that race, we all thought, oh my God, this could be the end of running as we know it. Because why would people go back to a public event which cannot be controlled?
Right.
Nobody can control two sides of a road for 26 miles. It can't be done. And why would you want to do it? That would be a military state if you did do it. And that's not what we would want to do in this country, of course. So is this the end of running? And we were all talking about that for a while. And then somehow there was this amazing turnaround after 24 hours when we all started saying, it's going to be the opposite. We're going to come back to Boston in a year and we're going to reclaim the streets. And the spectators and the citizenry of Boston felt the same. They wanted to come back and reclaim their sidewalks as well they should. So in the 2014 Boston Marathon, the energy was flowing both ways from the runners to the spectators. Thank you for welcoming us back. Thank you for cheering for us. And there were more and louder spectators than ever in 2014, all saying, welcome back to Boston. And of course, the runners saying, thank you for being here. So the energy was incredible, and I will never forget it. My wife and I both ran. Every year I go to Boston with the blue and yellow peace scarf that I got that year at the Finish Line Church. And it's a memory for the ages. And fortunately, it was a huge turning point. And we all proved that we could go back and do the things that we love the most in peace with security, with everyone cooperating for a joint good.
Yeah, I'm getting choked up. Just as you were talking about it, I was thinking back. It's just the emotions are so strong and so deep. It was, yeah. Let's talk life. There's so many parallels. You get to them in one of your prior books, The Runner's Guide to the Meaning of Life. If you were to rewrite that book now, 25 years later, it was originally 2000, what might you add to that in terms of the parallels of life and running?
Well, since I'm not remembering the exact date of writing that book, but it was at least 20 years ago. And, life goes on and you add 20 years. And I'm 76 now. And if there's anything that growing older makes you realize, it is how lucky you are to wake up in the morning and to get out of bed and to have a day in front of you when you can pursue the activities that are most meaningful for you. And I can whine endlessly, and I do whine endlessly about the fact that I'm slower today than I was yesterday, and that was slower than the year before and the decade before. Nobody turns around that slowdown clock at a certain point in our lives. But after I get over the whining, the truth is that I realize how incredibly fortunate I am to still be doing the things I love. And I was telling Bill and Joan both this weekend, when I go out to run on a daily basis now, I'm too damn slow and I don't like that. But I do not have a pain in my body when I run. And there are not a lot of people, perhaps of any age, but certainly of my age, who can say that. So I shuffle down the road, and as long as I don't look at my watch on my wrist, and as long as I enjoy what's around me, or I'll listen to podcasts, I admit, while I'm running now, life is good because I get to do what I want to do and love to do. It's what I've been doing for 50 years now, and my wife tells me I'm an eternal bore fest, but I wake up eager every day, and that's a good way to wake up.
Well, and the parallels to life is just so interesting because you talk about I'm slower and I still love it. I can't go win these races that I used to, and I still love it. I've changed things up. I listen to podcasts once in a while, or music or whatever, and I still love it. I think to me, that's a wonderful parallel of life because life changes. It's not the way we designed it. It's not the perfect picture we had. And yet you've found that joy. You've created that joy. You've brought that joy into your life by choosing each day to take those steps. That's a big deal.
I think it's a very big deal. And life not only changes, but there are too many unpleasant events around the corner waiting for us. And, when you encounter those events, you have to make choices. And one is, you can stop and give up, I guess. I could have stopped running when I hit 8 minutes per mile or something like that. Right. But, I didn't because that just didn't feel right to me. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And I really worry about people who stop being engaged in life with all the vigor they possibly can. I like to tell the story that my father, when he retired, he loved to sit on the porch, look at the sunset, sipping a lemonade. And I say to people, I like all those things. I like sitting on the porch. I like a rocking chair. I like the sunset. I can take a drink stronger than a lemonade. And I like doing some exercise before I do those things. I'd like to run a few miles before I get into the rocking chair in the evening. And I feel so fortunate that I can and do those things still. And I just really believe very, very strongly in the power of movement. I really believe that if we're not moving forward somehow at some pace, by whatever instruments it takes to move forward, then we're standing still and or sitting still, which is worse. And being still is too close to where I don't want to be.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the catalyst cornerstones of move, fuel, rest, and connect. If you get those right, it kind of fixes everything else. Move, fuel, rest, and connect. And you've identified one of the big ones.
Well, and I'm with you on the others as well. I mean, there's absolutely no question at all about all of those. And I'm probably an introvert, and I'm happy alone. I can be by myself, and it does not bother me. But I do love people, and I do love getting out, and it can be at the races where it's wonderful to talk to people about running and fitness and health and nutrition, but it can also be anywhere where we're talking about any other subjects. It's just fun. I've got a guy coming to visit me this afternoon. He's a 35-year-old professor at the University of Connecticut. We've never met. I barely know anything about him, but I saw a couple of papers that he had written recently, and I saw that he was at UConn, which is only an hour from where I live. So I just emailed him and said, "Hey, Joe, would you like to come down and we'll take a walk and we'll shoot the shit. We'll shoot the breeze for a few hours and see where our connections are." He is an ardent marathoner, if I didn't mention that. So yeah, we definitely have that connection. But he also lives in a number of academic worlds, which are not my home turf, but I'm curious about everything. And so I want to just see what he's up to and see what I can learn from hiking through the woods with him.
All right, so I want to jump on two words that you used in the last couple minutes here. One was vigor. You have this vigor for life more than many, frankly, 40-year-olds, let alone 50, 60, 70, 80-year-olds. What do you attribute that to? What is that just how you're made? Is that due to different choices? Where would you go with that? And then the second word, you just said it, is you're curious. You're 76. You've done all these amazing things, and you're still really curious. I love that, my friend. I love that so much. So talk to us a little about the vigor piece. And then I don't know if curiosity fits into that or if that's a different conversation.
I don't know either, but we can, certainly talk about both. So who knows the answer to where the vigor comes from? I mean, there might be some biological stuff going on there. I've never been good at sitting still. I'm not the most energetic person I know. I know people who, can't do anything except jumping jacks all day long and things. I can calm down and rest and relax, but I can't sit for long. I have to be moving. So I think there's a little bit of a biological aspect to it for me. But now, when you hit your 70s or whatever age, it's definitely choice. And you learn new things, you and I and everyone else every day about the importance of movement and spreading it through the day, as well as during our 30 or 60 minute run or bike or swim, whatever. So I try to do a little bit of all the things that I'm learning as I go. So I get my workout in during the day, but I try to move around during the rest of the day. And I'm not saying I don't watch Netflix at night. I do. I mean, I'm not living the perfect fitness lifestyle, but I'm doing a lot of things right, and I hope and I believe that the return is a vigorous life that comes back to me. And curiosity is a big subject in my life. My friend and another mentor, George Hirsch from Runner's World and the New York City Marathon, talk about that a lot. And I just, as I said, I'm boring on running. I know too much about running and I know too little about other things, but I'm intensely interested and curious about other things. And I'm perfectly willing to go on a walk with somebody. In fact, I love it when the other person is doing 95% of the talking and I'm just shooting a few questions their way and soaking up the responses and learning about things. This particular professor has got a degree in literature, but he's also very interested in the athletic body, which is a huge subject in our culture now. Perhaps it's been for a long time, but particularly I think the female body is something everybody is talking about. And how exactly do we let that be what it should be? I don't even know what terms to use, but he is teaching that subject this fall, and I'm very curious to know what he's reading and how he's preparing and what he thinks about all of the body awareness stuff that's out there, because it's important to all of us, the way we live and the way we react to others appropriately.
Have you always been curious, or is this something that you've really leaned into, maybe post-retirement, or I don't know?
I'm going to give some credit to my college, which was a long time ago. But as I said, I grew up kind of introverted and a bit of a loner, and, read books at home, but wasn't out there a lot. But when I got to college at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, it's one of these fine, small university colleges, liberal arts, which just, there was a huge encouragement for everyone at Wesleyan to pursue their own thing. Mm. And here I was, a marathoner in the 1960s when there weren't any. And I was at this college, and, I hate to say it, but I didn't walk between classes. I jogged between classes, okay, across the campus. And I had to be one of the weirdest people on that campus. And yet there were other weirdos doing their own things in the arts and music and science and math and politics and whatnot. And we all accepted each other for who we were and what we were intensely interested in. And when we had the chance, we all tried to learn from each other and to be curious about the other person. And, I would love to be a musician or be able to sing or something like that, but I have zero talent in those arenas. I don't even have a musical ear. I don't hear music the way so many people do. But I'm curious about it. I'm curious about the people who do it. And Lin-Manuel Miranda went to Wesleyan, so there are musicians there. And we have Hamilton the musical from him, and what a creation that is. So it's just, to me, it's absorbing to learn, to be curious and to learn.
Yeah. When people are like, why do you do this podcast for 300 episodes? It's that, Amby, it's that. It's just, yes, it's tiring sometimes. You have every week you need to get prepped and get everything lined up and that kind of stuff. But the chance to talk to so many interesting people week after week that know so much that I've never even heard of is fascinating. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I think that is a core element to a life worth living. Your 2018 book titled Run Forever guides us through this idea of a lifetime of running. We just saw another sub 3 hour marathon in London from a 73-year-old, and this guy wasn't alone. So what's going on here with these 60s, 70s, 80-year-olds doing these crazy, amazing things that 20 years ago a 50-year-old couldn't do?
Yeah, isn't it wonderful?
Oh, it's beautiful.
And I don't even know the performance you're referring to, because I'm following several which were better.
Yes.
At Boston, a 75-year-old woman, Jeannie Rice, essentially broke the world record. She beat the first man in her age group by 20 minutes.
Wow.
I mean, how often does the female beat the male in the age group, no matter what the age group is? And this was by 20 minutes. And at London, Jenny Hitchings ran, 2:45 at a week before her 60th birthday. Oh. And both of them on the age-graded calculator are over the top and, ahead of the winners of Boston and London. So it's a great frontier out there. The performances, of course, are what make the headlines. But I'm mainly interested in the people behind the headlines, because I have, in the last 2 or 3 years, I've become part of a digital group of runners which was started. I love it. We're all over 75. This digital group, it's an email list, are all over age 75. We're still actively pursuing something in running. About 12 of us were at Boston this year.
Wow.
And I love the fact that the group was started by a guy from the running capital of the world, Shreveport, Louisiana. Where else?
Of course.
The guy, a couple of years ago, he had 3 stents put in coronary arteries. And this year at 80, he's running like 150 in the half marathon. Wow. He didn't have a good day at Boston because he cramps, but he's a cool guy. And in this group of runners over 75 in my age group, I would say I'm about 2/3 of the way down the list.
Wow. Because
I'm at about 4:30 to 4:40 now in the marathon. And most of these guys are running around 4:10 or 4:20, and nobody has ever heard of them. Of course, they're incredibly interesting. A lot of university professors and engineers and mathematicians and all sorts of stuff. And they're just out there doing it because they all want to live the fullest life they can. They're all smart, unique individuals. And they're all runners, and they know that pursuing running is one way that they can live their best life. They have to do the other things, the other 3 principles in your group, but the running and the fitness they get from running is surely one important stake in the ground that keeps us going.
Yeah. So your thought with these folks achieving is, A, there's other models. You're not in it alone. You're seeing a number of people. Obviously, technology is helping us, better fueling techniques, more strengthening. Are there any things that I'm missing that you think are having an influence on such a large number of people? These are not anomalies anymore.
They're not anomalies. There's still too few, but we're going to keep encouraging them and bringing everybody out of the woodwork. I think, in addition to what you said, obviously the mental part of it is huge. Whether or not you're out there to win your age group in Boston or London, just knowing that you can do these things. I mean, nobody thought of 70-year-olds running the marathon 50 years ago. I knew old John Kelly when he was a young man at 50. And at 50, he seemed like such an extreme outlier, and there was no one else close to his age in the race. I mean, it went from 50 to 35 maybe at Boston, and he was out there, and he inspired all of us, of course. And since then, many of us, been trying to live in his image. And there are more and more of us, and each one of us reaches our fingers and tendrils out and tries to touch a few more folks. And the word slowly percolates out there that life doesn't end at 65 or 70. Surely it changes. Surely there are challenges. All of us have our own little particular medical condition of one kind of another at this age. But we keep going because it's the best thing we can possibly do.
Yeah. Okay. So when you were at your peak, it seems like the relatively slow training is coming back. And you talk about when you're at your peak, you're doing 100 to 140 miles a week at a relatively slow pace. We don't need to get into the details of that. But it sounds like what you hear Alan Couzens and so many others talking about now of the easy running, the occasional hard. Is that... How did you land on that back then when you didn't have the physiologist telling you to do it?
My body told me how to do it. That's the simplest answer, Brad. And the reason I've always assumed is because I really am a skinny kid. There are muscular runners out there, and I'm not one of them. And my skinny little body just did not want to go hard in training day after day. It was too much for my muscles or something. The paradox that I don't understand is why I could then turn it around on race day and take off and have a good effort. But I couldn't train hard every day. And whenever I was in a training group of my peers, I was always the slowest kid, one in the group. Yeah, I really was. Yet on a race day, I could beat many of those peers just because, I brought it together on race day somehow. In addition to Alan Couzens, whose stuff I read, and I think it's very interesting and very informative and more or less what I follow and believe in myself. I think you've got the Jeff Galloway run, walk, run influence. And that's not something that appeals to many people in their 20s and 30s. Men perhaps have more trouble with it than women because going slow and taking walk breaks is not a male testosterone activity. But it is absolutely the path forward for beginning runners, coming back from injury runners, older runners like myself. I've run more Bostons in the last decade than in any other decade of my life. It's almost like I'm getting close to the end. I figure I might as well do them while I can. And this year was the first time in a decade that I did not do run walk at Boston. I actually ran the whole distance this year, felt quite good. But in training, I do run walk 90% of the time because it's just simply the right way for someone my age and slowness to get out there and cover 4, 6, 10 miles at a time, if that's what I feel like doing. And in the nice days, and when I'm preparing for a marathon, that is what I want to do. And run, walk, get you there. And everybody can develop their own ratio of how much they run and how much they walk, and not worry about anybody else. Just do what's right for you.
Well, I'm sure that's super encouraging to folks that have been thinking, maybe I'll do a marathon or a half marathon or even a 10K is the permission, if you will, to do that. And if you don't know Jeff Galloway, folks, that's definitely a wonderful resource to tap into. If we can go back just briefly to when you were doing those 100-mile weeks, if you did a little pie chart for us, was it literally all easy stuff? Did you throw in one tempo a week? Did you throw in some speed work to get the legs turning? Or did you literally just build the mitochondria up? You had such an amazing base, and then you let it roll.
Well, it was certainly 80 or 90% slow stuff every day. And I mean, yeah, it was slow. We weren't walking out there, but we weren't exerting ourselves
Kenyan shuffle.
hard. It was a Kenyan shuffle because you're doing 20 miles a day or close to it, and you don't want to do a lot of effort. That said, I was in college then, and it was before all the whatever the conference meets are called now. We had dual meets. I mean, I had to race often twice a week, cross country or mile and 2 miles. So that was some speed work. Jeff Galloway was a college mate of mine, and Jeff and I did our little infamous workout of 40 times 400 once every fall on the grass. Yeah, it was not fast. It was not fast. 400s. Awesome. We were not running 60 seconds by any means. It was marathon pace. But we got out there on the grass barefoot around the football field. It was pretty exciting to just keep going. I don't know why it was exciting, but maybe because we psyched ourselves up for it. And so I had racing. I was young, whatever muscles my body had, I had them when I was 22. We did a little bit of racing. So I got in my speed work and tempo work. And it was actually after I got out of college, I got a little bit slower for a few years and realized that I wasn't racing anymore. So I had to start like doing 800 meter repeats on the track were kind of my go-to workout.
Got it. Perfect. All right. If you were to go back to the beginning of the journey, what would you do differently as a runner?
I would try to be not as obsessive as I was when I was young. And I might not succeed because I still have obsessive tendencies, I guess you could say. And by that, I mean running when you're injured. I did that when I was young, and it backfired and blew up in my face a couple of times. Now I realize that if you just rest for 2 or 3 days or walk for a week, the injury usually goes away. They usually are soft tissue injuries, which will resolve if we give them the chance. But I was obsessed by the need to run mileage, to compete and race well. When I was young, I would like to put a little bit of that behind me. Otherwise, I don't look back and regret anything that I did, even the mistakes. It seems part of the learning process to me. And I don't think much about what I could do again. I would have liked to win more than one Boston Marathon.
Sure.
I went back to Boston in great shape several other years and just did not have the day that I had in 1968. Of course, I would have loved to have made the Olympic team. That was the reason we were all running what we were doing to a high level. 1968 was perhaps my year. But this is a story you'll appreciate. After winning Boston, I started doing a little speed work, and I was in better shape a month later. We had the New England Track Championships, and I won the 3-mile pretty easily. And then there was another event on the calendar that I had never done in my life. And I thought, I can't go through life without doing this. I'll never do it after college. So I had to run the steeplechase.
Of course. I knew you were going to say that.
I ran the steeplechase without any training for it at all. I ran in last place for 2 laps, and then it was so slow, I circled the field and I won the steeplechase. And the next day, my hurdling muscle in my butt was pulled to smithereens, and I could barely get lifted out of bed the next morning. And that injury hung on for 2 months because I refused to let it heal. It was all my fault. I wouldn't take a week off or 2 weeks off. I would take 1 day off, and then I would double my mileage the next day. That got me nowhere. So I was a mess at the Olympic marathon trials and dropped out of that race and was depressed. I went to the beach for 2 weeks. I lay on the beach for 2 weeks and did nothing. And then I ran several of the best races of my life that fall because I was healthy, but I missed the Olympic trials opportunity. So, of course, I'd love to have that one back again. But as I say, no regrets. So much of my life has been so wonderful, and the running opportunities that nobody ever imagined would be there in 1968 all kind of blossomed at my footsteps, and I took advantage of the ones that were offered, and it's been fantastic.
And one nugget that folks may have missed in there, and I'll phrase this 2 ways. First, for the runners, and you know who you are, we always try to make up the mileage. Stop. Just stop. And Amby, I'm 57, so I'm a few years behind you, but that's the lesson that I'm still trying to remember of if you're out for a couple of days, you don't make it up when you come back. You're better and you move forward. And I think that applies to life too. I think so often in life we hit a hiccup and we're like, oh, now I'm behind. Behind what?
Yeah, exactly. And I often say to people in the vein that you've just expressed, that which makes us terrific runners and terrifically successful in the rest of our life, the goal setting, the discipline, the consistency, the hard work, the mental toughness, all of those things that we bring to all of our areas of life are also sometimes our greatest enemies and our greatest weakness when we don't know that it's time to pull back and say, okay, I don't have to do everything every single day. There's a time to slow down, rest, recover, and get ready for a better day.
Yeah, my PhD focused on mental toughness, and that's one of the interesting research studies that we didn't do internally, but I remember reviewing, is the higher level of mental toughness, oftentimes the more likely to become eventually burned out or injured. So yes, the strength is our weakness, as is so true in so many aspects of life. My friend, last question, final words of wisdom, not running wisdom, just life stuff. You've had a lot of chance to do a lot of amazing things. Anyone looking to live the life of a catalyst, what would you encourage them to keep in mind, keep in the forefront, whatever that maybe they're not hearing elsewhere?
Well, I don't know that anyone's not hearing it elsewhere, because I've come to believe that all the cliches in life are in fact truisms and the right path to be following. But I believe in exercise, movement, and fitness. I believe in goal setting and sticking with those goals and pursuing what you feel passionate about, what makes you feel happy, brings you joy every day. Understanding that there will be obstacles, and some of them are molehills and some of them are mountains. And I've had to hit to go up and over both of those in my life, and so does everybody else. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is a new dawn tomorrow. Thinking optimistically, believing in the positive, which are attitudes I didn't have earlier in my life. I was probably darker and more cynical then, but now I really believe there's tremendous power to the optimistic, positive outlook on life, and believing that you can get there if you just pursue like tortoise and the hare. I'm much more of a tortoise than a hare, but it's stood me well.
My friend, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us. You've done so much for the community. You continue to. You're not done yet. You're keeping that curiosity. You got that vigor. Keep it rolling.
Brad, thank you so much. It's been great talking with you. I love the work that you're doing, and I don't envy the podcast production stuff you have to do, but I do envy all the people you're talking to. I think that's a wonderful and great thing.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Good. Take care.
Thanks for tuning into the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. It is hard to believe this is our 277th consecutive weekly episode. It's an honor to have you spend a part of your week with us, and we really appreciate those of you who have shared the Catalyst 360 podcast with friends, family, and peers. It's the only reason we keep growing, and we really appreciate it. If you've been considering pursuing your MBHWC approved health and wellness coach certification to pursue, maybe a new career, starting your own business, or enhance your clinical skills, our next cohort is launching very soon. Please reach out to us anytime to get your questions answered. Results at catalystcoaching360.com. That's results at catalystcoaching360.com, or head over to our training website, catalystcoachinginstitute.com, for additional details, including information about the 6 months no payment option. And now it's time to be a Catalyst. This is Catalyst Coaching 360's Dr. Brad Cooper. Make it a great rest of your week, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.